Okay, today we're going to go over how to install a rebuild kit into a pump, and this is the kit here in the bag, and here are some tools that I'd suggest having handy that make the process easier. Have a sharp utility knife, a Phillips head #2 screwdriver, a small slotted screwdriver, and you don't need this, but it's handy, 5/16 nut driver, an adjustable wrench, a needle nose plier, and a diagonal cutter. We're going to open this kit up here and take a look at what's inside. We have a new end cap assembly, new brass parts, new springs, new piston, and all new O-rings. So to put the rebuild kit in, we're going to have to take the old pump apart, and before we start tearing it apart, it's a good idea to take the lube out of the reservoir, because if you don't, it's going to spill all over the place. So take the cap off, and we got a little jar here to pour it into. We'll save it and put it back into it when we're done rebuilding it. So get that all out of there. Set that aside. So we're basically going to take these screws out and pull that out, and we'll also disconnect the hose. I'm going to disconnect the hose first here. So we'll use the adjustable wrench. Take that fitting loose. So the fitting's loose, but it's still connected, that inside line, because this has a coaxial hose. It's connected to the barb fitting, which is down in there. And I'm going to cut that tubing off to free the hose up with this diagonal cutter here. Take the, well, I'm going to take this magnet off here. That'll make things easier. And I will take the end cap out. So, and normally you can just pull this out. Sometimes it comes out a little bit tough, and you can use a slotted type screwdriver and pry it out, but I'm just going to pull on this one, and it just came right out. And there's some parts that are going to have to come out there. You can pull some of them out with your fingers, but another easy way to do it is to push them out from this side. So we'll just shove them out there. They pop out. Now, one thing that's often overlooked, way down in this pump, there's an O-ring that sits in the very bottom. It's an 012 O-ring, and it's kind of hard to see. You want to make sure that's out of there. So I take my little screwdriver and poke down in there, and sure enough, there's one down in there, and I just work that out, make sure that's out of there, because we got to replace that. And this is the order they go in. First, you take one of the 012, drop it in there, and you want it to seat down in the bottom square. So a 5/16 nut driver is just the right size to fit that bore and guide that in there right straight and square to the bottom. So I just tap it in there a few times, make sure it's all the way to the bottom. The next item to go in is this. It's the barbed brass fitting. The barb goes down. Just drop that in there, and that's going to go through that 012 O-ring. I like to use a 5/16 nut driver and just push it a little bit. You can actually hear it kind of click as it goes through that O-ring and then seats against the bottom. Next thing is another 012 O-ring. So I'm going to drop that in there, seat it in there with a nut driver, sitting on top of that brass thing we just put in. Next item is the smaller of the two springs. That's the one that goes in first here. Just drop that in. Now that can be a little bit tricky too. I dropped it in there and it went in cockeyed. So I need to straighten that out so it sits lengthwise in there. It goes right down into that recess, and that's in there. Next thing is to install this check seal in a brass holder. That goes right into that spring that we just dropped in there. The little end on it there with a smaller diameter, that fits inside of the spring. And I'm just going to use this needle nose plier and grab it there and insert it down into there so that it goes right into that spring. So you probably can't see that too well, but that's seated down in that spring with a seal facing up. The next item to go in is this brass fitting. We call this a metering insert, and it goes in with this side down and the O-rings facing up. So you can just drop that in there, guide it in, and it'll sit in there. It doesn't sit real firmly because it's on top of that spring. It's a little bit bouncy there, springy. The next item is to put in this washer, and you need to pay attention to what side you're putting in facing up. This washer has got a raised surface on this side but not the other. The raised surface needs to be facing up. The reason for that is it serves as a guide for this spring, which is going to sit on the top there. So raised edge up, drop that in there. It looks like that. Next item to go in is the large 018 O-ring. Just drop that in there. That's kind of sits on top of that brass washer. Make sure that's in there square. And now we're going to install the metering pin. There's actually 3 parts to this. You've got the pin, the return spring, and this is basically a bushing to hold the spring in place. So you take the pin, put it through this brass piece, just like that. Then the spring goes around it, and you take that and you insert it into that small hole in the washer we already installed. So just set it in there and push on it a few times, make sure it moves freely. Should look like that. And now we're ready to put this in. This comes pre-assembled. New plunger assembly with a brass knob and the plastic housing. And that just inserts in there. And we push it down and line up the slots in the wings with the screw holes there. And we'll take our screws, get them started. Generally, it's a good idea to not run them in all the way, one at a time. I like to kind of torque them down side to side just to make sure that thing goes in there straight. Now that's installed. We have 3 O-rings here that are included with the kit, and those actually go between the blocks, and I'm going to go ahead and replace those now too. So we're going to take this nut driver, or this Allen wrench here, take these screws out, and you can see the existing O-rings there, and we're going to replace those. So I'll just take my little screwdriver and pop those out, discard those. I'll wipe it off and inspect that, make sure there's no debris in there. It looks good. Take our new O-rings. And now I could put it back together. I'm going to reuse these. There. The pump's rebuilt. Okay, when I installed the rebuild kit, I disconnected the coax hose from the pump, and when I did that, I cut the capillary tubing, and now it's too short to go back on the pump just the way it is. I need to trim the outer hose, and I'm going to take about an inch of that off, and I do not want to cut the inside line. So what I'm going to do is disconnect the outer hose from this push to connect fitting. So to do that, you'll just push on this collar here and pull back, and now the outer hose is loose, but the capillary hose is still connected in there, and if I just pull on that, you'll see this starts to move back. So pulling on that, now I can safely cut this without cutting the inside line. And I'm going to disconnect this fitting here too by pushing on the collar and pulling. And I'm going to cut about an inch of that outer hose off. A little bit more. I want to make it square. There we go. So now that that's trimmed, I'll push this back together. Helps to wiggle it a little bit. So there I have some extra of the capillary sticking beyond the outer hose. That's what you need to get it to project beyond the end of this fitting and give you a little length to work with. That piece of capillary tubing needs to be connected to this barb here. I'm going to use a needle nose pliers to grip that, get a little bit of length beyond the end of the pliers, and hold it firmly but not overly tight so that you collapse the hose. You don't want to crush that capillary, but hold it firmly, and you just line it up on that. Oops. And push. Like that. It's a little bit flattened out, but not bad. That's on there securely. You can pull on it and it won't come off. And now I'll reattach this fitting. This fitting rotates on this hose, so you don't have to worry about that twisting up. So we'll just tighten it down. That's tight enough. And now we can refill the reservoir with the fluid we had taken out. Well, before I do that, I want to put the magnet back on. So now the kit's installed, the hose is reinstalled, fluid's back in the reservoir, and we need to run a little fluid through it now because basically it's dry inside the pump. So this drain plug here, we're going to open that up and let some fluid flow through it and then tighten it back down. So that's a 5/16 hex there, using my 5/16 nut driver, and open that. You can see fluid running through it. That's basically all you need to run through it, just a little bit, and then tighten it down. Don't over tighten it though, you can actually break that thing off if you reef on it. So just snug it down. It's got a seal on it, and that'll seal up. And just wipe it off.